And I'll tell you, Dennis, on that point, I make sure to thank citizens for speaking out, because we can't do our jobs if we don't have input from the public. And the public spoke out loud and clear in relation to those proposals. They had lengthy hearings that lasted well into the night with all of the different interest groups you mentioned and everyday citizens taking time out of their day to come down to the legislature and talk about how those radical plans would have negatively impacted their lives. So that's a real win for the people of Nebraska. And I say power to the people.
Absolutely. And then what came out of it was some kind of a tax modernization study commission. Mm-hmm. What is that all about? Where is that going?
Well, in lieu of moving forward with any of those more radical positions that were staked out early in the session, a group of senators came together and said, wait a minute, let's hit the pause button here, and let's acknowledge the fact that it's been many years, decades in fact, since we've taken a comprehensive look at our revenue infrastructure and at our tax system, and a lot of things have changed since the last time we did a major overhaul. But let's not rush to judgment. Let's not move forward in a hasty way that brings forth unintended consequences for families and for businesses. Let's take a step back, let's pull together the experts over the course of the next year, and let's figure out what's best for Nebraska moving forward. What type of modernization or evolution should occur from a policy perspective, not a political perspective. And that's what the Nebraska legislature always has done and is planning to do as we move forward. So I think that's a much better, a much more conservative, a much more sound approach to looking at our tax policy and ensuring that the revenue system helps meet our state's needs so that we can be vibrant and competitive.
Is the commission going to look at the Nebraska Advantage Act? I mean, there's been several studies recently. We spend $40 million a year on the Nebraska Advantage Act. We send this money to large corporations. In return, they promise they'll create jobs, but the studies show they cannot prove any jobs have been created through spending $40 million a year on the Nebraska Advantage Act. Is the commission going to look at that, whether or not it's effective?
They absolutely are going to take into account our tax incentive programs, which I'm very thankful for. And that wasn't originally contemplated as part of the study, but myself and other senators brought forth legislation this year to address those very concerns, because we had a chance to review independent studies from outside of Nebraska and also our own Legislative Performance Audit Committee, which said, hey, wait a minute, these programs have a huge price tag on them, and are we really getting the results that we had hoped for? Are they a good value for the taxpayer? That's a point that is left to be debated, but I think that we have enough initial information to take a second look and to go back and see if maybe we need to reform those programs a little bit, or maybe we just need to start from scratch and say this isn't a good value for the taxpayers. I think one thing that's particularly concerning in my reading of those reports is not only are we paying a lot of money to create a certain amount of jobs, but the type of job that we're creating. Some of them aren't even meeting the state average wage, which means that the state taxpayer is then kind of twice subsidizing large corporations, because then of course if people are working and still qualifying for public assistance, you know, that's a real drain on our state budget. So we need to make sure that we're making investments in high quality jobs that really support Nebraskans.
It strikes me there's been very little scrutiny of the Nebraska Advantage Act over the years. I mean, we get these Republicans who posture as fiscal conservatives complaining about Medicaid and programs that help the poor and the middle class, but they do not complain at all about the Nebraska Advantage Act, where we're spending $40 million a year, and we and we can't prove that any results are coming out of the spending of this money. Yeah. Will the Tax Modernization Commission take a look at the road earmark bill that was sponsored and passed through former State Senator Deb Fisher in previous sessions? It
will, and you and your listeners may know that I actually put in a bill this very year to repeal that legislation. And people say, gosh, why are you against roads, and why are you against roads and infrastructure financing? And I'm not. I've always been a champion for improved investments in roads and infrastructure financing. But what I'm not a fan of and what I'm not a champion of is this approach that the Nebraska legislature has recently undertaken through the leadership of Deb Fisher. And what she did was she created one of the largest earmarks in state history, where she went out and grabbed a certain earmark of sales tax and diverted that to roads on top of what we normally use to fund roads, which is user fees and the gas tax and some other critical areas. And that's fine and well in terms of trying to build some more roads, but what it also means is more and more pressure on education and healthcare and public safety and natural resources and all of those critical state obligations that we fund out of the general fund and our general tax revenues. Now we have almost $70 million right out of the gate less each year to go to those important obligations.
That's a good idea to revisit that whole issue.
I think so, because it also creates that earmark component also creates a very curious result. For example, any change we would ever make to sales tax then moving forward would affect the amount that would be going to roads financing. And I was quick to point out after the governor put forward his proposal that if it were to be adopted, we'd almost be doubling the amount we originally anticipated would go to roads funding, about $60 or $70 million a year, quickly jumped to 110 just with the introduction of those two bills. So because of how that bill it has tied roads funding to our sales tax system, anytime we tweak the sales tax, good, bad, or otherwise, it's going to impact that area. I'm hopeful that as part of this interim study, as part of this comprehensive commission, we can find a more responsible and stable way to support roads and infrastructure financing, because there is need. There is a need there,
absolutely.
and there are good jobs that come with that kind of funding, but it can't be at the expense of kids, and it can't be at the expense of our most vulnerable
Right, we have
Nebraskans.
to strike the correct balance.
That's right.
Shifting gears, you sponsored a bill in this session to eliminate discrimination against gays in employment. Tell us a little bit about that bill and,
Sure.
and what your plans are for that.
Sure. Well, it was a very exciting piece of legislation to work on, and I'm so honored to bring it forward. It's not a new bill for the Nebraska legislature. Actually, Senator Chambers has introduced similar versions of this legislation in years past, but this is my first time to carry it, and I'm proud to have Senator Chambers and other senators as a co-sponsor with this legislation. And I really think the time is right for us to revisit this issue. As you well know, there's been a lot of conversations locally and nationally about these critical civil rights issues. It was taken up in central Nebraska. We had a long discussion here in Lincoln about this issue, and then most recently in Omaha, the City Council has moved and has in fact adopted an equal rights in the workplace ordinance that protects all of the citizenry in Omaha. So right now I feel that it's really disparate that we have most of the citizens in Omaha protected through this kinds of ordinance, but then the rest of our citizenry is without protection. And I think that it's amazing that when you start visiting about this issue with citizens, that people are surprised that these protections don't exist. But sadly, they do not. And my belief in bringing it forward is very simple. No one should be fired for who they are and who they love. And that's just a key core value that I'm committed to and committed to working on through this legislative session and beyond. So we had a fantastic hearing at the legislature's Judiciary Committee a few weeks ago. And I'm hopeful if we don't see movement this year that it very well could be a priority bill for myself or somebody else next year.
Right. It usually takes a long time to affect change, but at some point you have to make the first move, you know, establish the beachhead. There's a first step in every long journey. I mean, these fairness ordinances have been passed in Omaha and cities all over the country. They seem to be working very well. The opponents of these kind of laws always predict this parade of horrible things that will occur if these kind of laws pass. Has any of that happened in the real world?
You know, it really hasn't, and you're exactly right. There's something like 180 cities that have these laws on the books, and many states join the ranks each year in adopting this kind of legislation. And I think that you can see from experience very clearly that what this legislation does is it really just provides a basic level of protection and fairness in terms of workplace issues and discrimination. And it keeps the focus where it should be. It says when we're talking about a job, when we're talking about employment, we should be talking about qualifications. We should be talking about merit. We should be talking about performance on the job. We shouldn't be talking about arbitrary things like who you are and who you love.
Right, that should not be a relevant factor at all.
That's right.
I mean, there's been no flood of litigation in these other cities where these have passed. I mean, none of these bad things have happened that the opponents are predicting. I mean, there's been a lot of experience with these kind of laws, and they've worked out very, very well.
That's right.
in cities across the country and other states across the country, and it could work here in Nebraska too.
Absolutely. So I'm very excited about that legislation, and I'm very excited to see forward progress on that topic this year or next.
Yeah. Another big topic of conversation and debate in the legislature this session is the bill to expand Medicaid as part of the Obamacare national health insurance law. Studies from the University of Nebraska Medical Center and other reputable sources say that the Medicaid expansion will actually both save money as well as save lives. What are the prospects for this legislation, and how will it improve the lives of Nebraskans and be fiscally responsible at the same time?
This is a fantastic question, and something that I'm so excited about. I was one of the first co-sponsors to this legislation, which was brought forward by Senator Kathy Campbell, also from Lincoln, who's chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and who's doing a dynamite job in that role and has really done a great job in bringing this idea forward. And if you go and if you look at the legislation, you can see it's truly a bipartisan effort. There are senators from all across our great state and all across the political spectrum who have committed to seeing this issue move forward. And Nebraska really has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to move forward and to expand Medicaid to cover more working families. And I really see this as a couple of things. This is a workforce issue. This is a family values issue. And never in my 7 years serving in the legislature have we had the opportunity to affect change for so many people in such a positive way as we can with this legislation. So it has now been advanced from the legislature's Health and Human Services Committee. Senator Campbell has prioritized it as her priority bill for this year, and we will have debate in the full legislature about whether or not to move forward. As I understand it, working with Senator Campbell and others, it looks like we have strong support for passage. What we're unclear about at this point in time is if we'll have enough support for a gubernatorial override, because Governor Heineman has been very clear and consistent that he is opposed to this legislation, which I think is particularly disappointing. When you look at the fiscal aspects, when you look at the human aspects that this legislation has an ability to impact, it really is a no-brainer. And I think that's why you've seen Republican governor after Republican governor all across this great country say, wait a minute, let's take the politics out of this, let's stop fighting about Obamacare, and let's do the right thing for our citizens in our state. And I hope that maybe the governor will reconsider his position, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we can all work together to do something great.
Governor Heineman is one of the few Republican governors in the country who is opposed to the Medicaid expansion. I mean, governors who are Republicans in Florida and Ohio and Arizona and Michigan have agreed to the Medicaid expansion. Governor Heineman is one of the last few holdouts. I'm actually cautiously optimistic we can find the 30 votes to override the legislation thanks to the presence of 3 new excellent state senators who were elected last fall, Senator Kalowski, Senator Bowles, and Senator Crawford. And I would request my fellow Democrats, call your state senators when this comes up for a vote and urge your senator to vote to override the expected veto from Governor Heineman. I'm optimistic we can get to 30 votes, because we had 30 votes last year to override Governor Heineman's veto of the prenatal bill. That was a very big victory for progressive forces and for the middle class and for the poor.
Absolutely. And you're right. We've had an election that happened in between that time, and we have some new and some more progressive members that have joined our ranks. But if your viewers think for 1 second, gosh, oh, state legislature, how does that affect my life? It really affects their lives even more so in some ways than what happens in Congress or on the federal level. The closer you get with each level of government, whether it's federal, state, or city, really the closer it is to the people in their everyday lives. And elections matter. There's no doubt about that. And each vote is going to be absolutely necessary as we move forward on this critical topic. And we need to ensure that new senators are aware of all of the support that exists for this topic. And we need to say thank you to the senators who are already committed, because that's important as well. And you can make bet once the governor and the rest of the opposition really turn up the heat and start to go after individuals. Everybody needs a little shoring up, and everybody needs to really work forward in a unified manner. And we can't do our jobs as well if the people don't weigh in with their voice.
I mean, contacting a state senator, even a Republican, might bring about a result, because we have forces as disparate as the hospital industry that supports this legislation. The hospitals aren't exactly liberal.
That's right.
And so I'm expecting that the hospitals and districts across the state will be contacting their state senators, urging them to pass this legislation to end this problem of uncompensated care with people that lack health insurance. And so there'll be a lot of Republican senators hearing from, you know, people who are Republicans from their district who actually favor the legislation. So I think we have a very good chance of passing it.
I'd hope so, and I'm so thankful that people like the Nebraska Hospitals Association have been such forceful advocates in moving forward with this legislation. And I think if you go back and you do check the committee statement on this, you can see there's a very diverse set of supporters. The Nebraska Catholic Conference, the Nebraska Hospital Association, business groups, academics, advocates for the poor and working families. And this really isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. This really isn't a pro or anti-Obama issue. This is about ensuring that Nebraskans who work hard and play by the rules can access basic health care.
It's very important. What's interesting is I'm a personal injury and workers' compensation lawyer, and there's this problem. The working poor do not have access to health insurance.
That's right.
They're not poor enough to qualify for Medicaid. They work at low-wage jobs that lack, you know, health insurance benefits, and so the Medicaid expansion will reward people who choose to work for a living in a low-wage job, and we should reward work.
That's absolutely right. And it's also good for business. Study after study shows us that when people have access to basic health care and wellness kind of programs, that increases productivity, it decreases absenteeism, and it really helps to balance the playing field in terms of what small businesses might not otherwise be able to provide. So this is really, like I said, a no-brainer and a win-win for our state. So I'm hopeful that that diverse group of supporters will continue to work towards passage. And it's going to be a long and arduous battle, but I'm confident that once we really lay out the arguments, it will be difficult for people to say no. But of course, there will still be some opponents. And I can tell you, I'm going to work hard to ensure I'm on the right side of not only this bill, but this is really a historical moment.
Yeah, please work on some of the other senators. We know you're on the right side. Talk to some of the ones that could be persuadable.
That's right.
Now, last year a bill passed to provide prenatal care for all women, and apparently there's a bill pending the legislature now to reverse that bill. What is that all about this session?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an issue that really has spanned a few years during my legislative tenure. And what happened was that Nebraska, like many states, had a pretty good prenatal program in place through its Medicaid program that covered a lot of women and families in need of these basic prenatal services, because we as a state a long time ago made the correct value judgment that by making small investments in prenatal care, we can ensure that we have healthy moms and healthy babies, and that saves everybody a lot of money and it improves lives. Well, because of some federal rules, how we operated our prenatal program had to be changed. And so again, this is not unique or interesting from Nebraska's perspective, so we needed to simply make a state change in terms of how that program was administered. Well, unfortunately, the Heinemann administration decided to play politics with really these babies and these moms and these children's lives. And because the program happened to also cover some undocumented citizens, they really just moved to destroy the program and to ensure that all of those who previously were getting help, nobody would be able to get help under it. And so we had about a year or so, maybe two, if memory serves, where this program was eviscerated. And what we saw in the meantime was that women forwent prenatal care, and we had some really bad outcomes. Some women even decided to terminate their pregnancies because of this issue. And so this brought together a very diverse set of people to work to restore
Right to Life
it.
backed the bill.
That's right.
It had bipartisan support.
That's absolutely right.
Former Senator Speaker Mike Flood was a big proponent of the bill.
Absolutely. And Democrats and Republicans, Right to Life was next to Planned Parenthood and Appleseed, and as diverse of a coalition as you can imagine, came together and said, Governor Heineman, no, this is wrong. We're going to restore this program because it makes fiscal sense and it's the right thing to do. And it was a hard-fought battle, but we won and we restored the program, and it's already paying good dividends to ensure those basic premises of healthy moms and healthy babies can be carried out. But sadly, Senator Charlie Jansen has introduced legislation this year to turn the clock back and to go back to that dark period where we didn't have coverage for all of those who needed it. And he had a hearing before the Health and Human Services Committee this week that I think it's fair to say will not be advancing the bill. So please ask your viewers to write in, to email, to call the legislature's Health and Human Services Committee and tell them thank you for standing up for moms, and thank you for standing up for these kids who need access to basic prenatal care, because it's not just about them, it's really about all of us. Again, with not only how we treat vulnerable members of society, but it's good fiscal sense.
Absolutely.
By ensuring that pregnant moms have an ability to see a doctor and get some prenatal vitamins. You know, we're not talking about Cadillac health care here. We can really make a difference.
And in the long term, it saves a lot of money in Medicaid
that's
costs.
Right.
If a baby is born prematurely,
that's
the
right.
expenses of keeping that baby alive and restoring him or her to health are astronomical.
That's right.
Just a small investment in prenatal care can save a lot of money down the road.
Absolutely. And so I'm hopeful that we won't have to revisit that topic again anytime soon. But it is sad and disappointing that people like Senator Jansen can be so tone deaf to those critical quality of life issues and can be so reckless from a fiscal perspective.
I mean, as Democrats, with the Medicaid expansion, the prenatal bill, we can improve the quality of lives and be fiscally responsible at the same time, and I think we need to let the voters know that. And the way I see it is Senator Jansen is running for governor, and he's pandering to the worst elements, the worst parts of the Republican base, and bringing up this bill. It's completely counterproductive.
It is sad that somebody would take that much time grandstanding for their own political purposes and leave in the wake real Nebraskans and their lives, and really tear a hole in our state budget on increased Medicaid expenses and otherwise. It's a clear demonstration that he may not be ready for prime time.
He's not ready for prime time. There's much better people that could potentially run for governor. Well, unfortunately, in 2014, you'll be term limited out.
That's right.
I think that you are a good argument against term limits your time as senator, and I would say that about a number of other good senators: Steve Lathrop, Bill Avery, Amanda McGill.
That's right.
You guys are all very good arguments against term limits. So what's next for Senator Danielle Conrad after 2014?
You know, it's hard to say at this point in time, and I guess in our business you never say never, I suppose, but you know, it was my dream to serve in the Nebraska legislature, and I've had a distinct honor and opportunity to do that for 8 years. How many people get to live out their dream? So the chance that I've had to effectuate so many different areas of public policy has really been tremendous and exciting. And right now I'm looking forward to a return to private life, so to speak. We have a little one at home now, and that kind of changes your priorities and your time commitments and obligations. But there's so many different ways to serve your community and your state, and you can rest assured that I'll continue to be a vocal advocate, no matter what role I'm serving in, for working families and for women and for children, which are issues that I've always championed in the legislature. And who knows, maybe I'll be like Ernie and sit out for a while and come back down the road.
Yeah, we appreciate your commitment to public service, and we look forward to working with you as your term runs out, and after your term is over, we look forward to working with you as you continue to advocate for the causes that you believe in, and hopefully there's another run for Senator Danielle Conrad for another office. Thank you so much for agreeing to the interview. It's been my distinct pleasure and honor to interview you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you. budget is it turns a Medicare guarantee into a voucher program. Instead of getting a guarantee of medical care, senior citizens would receive a voucher in the mail, and with that voucher they'd be required to purchase private health insurance in the dysfunctional private health insurance market. And one of the problems with the Ryan plan is that it abolishes Obamacare, and that brings back pre-existing condition clauses. So far, the Republicans and Ryan haven't told us how seniors will be able to find affordable and comprehensive health insurance with the return of pre-existing condition clauses. One of the reasons why we had Medicare beginning in 1965 was because senior citizens couldn't purchase affordable health insurance because many senior citizens have already have pre-existing conditions. And Paul Ryan would return us to this situation we had before 1965 where senior citizens simply couldn't afford to get private health insurance. Another problem with the Ryan plan is that 63% of the cuts in his plan affect programs that benefit the poor. There's huge cuts in Medicaid, student aid, housing assistance, energy assistance. The Ryan plan would be the biggest redistribution of wealth upwards in the history of the country. And what's disturbing to me is the 5 Nebraska Republicans of members of Congress voted for the Ryan plan. Senator Johans, Senator Fisher, Congressman Fortenberry, Congressman Terry, and Congressman Smith all voted for this regressive plan that would cut benefits for the seniors and for the poor and for the middle class. We Nebraskans have to let our fellow citizens know how bad this plan is. Very few people know what's in the Ryan plan. We have to get our message out that these 5 Nebraska Republicans voted to cut Medicare to finance tax cuts for the wealthy. And what's even more interesting and disturbing about it was last fall during the campaign, then State Senator Deb Fisher promised that she would vote against the Ryan plan. But one of her first acts as a U.S. Senator was to vote for and support the Ryan plan. In contrast, the Senate Democrats have come up with their own budget plan, which passed a few days ago. This budget plan is fiscally responsible. It keeps our promises to seniors, keeps our promises to the middle class, keeps our promises to the least fortunate individuals in our society. There's about $2 trillion in deficit reduction. $1 trillion is in spending cuts across the board. There are no benefit cuts for seniors, no benefit cuts for the poor, and there's also $1 trillion in increased taxes on the wealthy. This Senate budget would reduce the deficit as a percentage of GDP from 5.5% of GDP at the present time to 2.4% of GDP in 10 years. When President Obama took office, the federal budget deficit was 10% of GDP. It's now down to 5.5% of GDP. Under the Senate plan, it will be reduced to 2.4% of GDP. This is a level of deficit that all economists say is manageable for our economy, and also a level of deficit reduction that was recommended by the Simpson-Bowles Commission. So you see 2 very different budget proposals from the 2 parties. Our proposal reflects Nebraska values, it reflects American values. We keep our promises to seniors, and we ask the wealthy to pay their fair share. We ask them to pay a little more. In contrast, the Republican budget backed by Johans, Fisher, Fortenberry, Terry, and Smith reflects the values of Wall Street. It cuts Medicare and Medicaid to finance tax cuts for the wealthy. We Nebraska Democrats need to get the message out that we have the superior budget, the true budget that reflects our values, Nebraska values, American values. Thank you very much.